June 6, 1944, 0015 hours, strong point WN62, Omaha Beach. Corporal Heinrich Severloh meticulously wiped down the barrel of his MG-42 machine gun inside the cold concrete bunker overlooking the English Channel. In his pocket rested a letter from his sweetheart in Metzingen, promising to wait for him until Germany's certain victory. The invasion will be their grave. We'll drive them back into the sea within hours. He had written those confident words to her just 3 days before, shortly after Field Marshal Rommel himself had come to inspect their defenses. The Desert Fox had peered through Severloh's gun slit, observed the intersecting arcs of fire, and nodded approvingly. "When they come," Rommel had said, "this beach will become their cemetery." Through the narrow opening, Severloh could see nothing now but the still, moonlit waters of the channel. The night was calm, eerily so. In less than 12 hours, this same young soldier would be discovered sobbing uncontrollably inside his bunker, surrounded by over 13,000 spent cartridges, his gun barrel twisted by heat, staring blankly at an invasion force so vast that his mind could scarcely comprehend it. Though Severloh would later claim to have caused between 1,000 and 2,000 casualties, historians find that impossible. Total American losses at Omaha Beach, from all causes, were about 2,400. The proof of German defeat would soon be written not in war plans or situation reports, but in the stunned recollections of men who witnessed the largest amphibious invasion in history. From the wrong end of a gun, the Atlantic Wall stretched 2,400 miles from Norway to Spain, touted by Nazi propaganda as the strongest defensive line ever built. Along the Normandy coast, 58 divisions of mixed quality occupied positions that had consumed 17 million cubic meters of concrete and 1.2 million tons of steel. Hitler himself had called it unbreakable. At Omaha Beach, the defenses seemed to justify that claim. The U.S. Army Center of Military History records that German engineers had built 8 reinforced bunkers, 35 pillboxes, 4 artillery emplacements, 18 anti-tank gun sites, 45 rocket launcher positions, 85 machine gun nests, and 6 mortar pits. The beach had been turned into a killing ground. 3,700 obstacles planted in the tidal zone, including Belgian gates, Czech hedgehogs, and wooden poles tipped with teller mines. Behind the shoreline, 6.5 million mines were buried, though Rommel had demanded 10 times that number. Colonel Ernst Goth, commanding the 916th Grenadier Regiment near Bayeux, had calculated his unit's firepower. 4 batteries capable of firing 120 shells per minute across the landing zones. Combined with nearby artillery, the Germans could unleash devastating fire on any attempted landing. But these figures assumed limitless ammunition. A fatal mistake June 5th had brought storms that Luftwaffe meteorologist Walter Stube in Paris deemed impossible weather for an invasion. Winds hit 20 to 25 knots, waves rose 6 feet high, and clouds hung barely 500 feet above the sea. Using reports from U-boats and coastal weather stations, Stube assured German command that the poor conditions would last for weeks. Confident in this forecast, many senior officers had left their posts. Rommel himself departed for Germany to celebrate his wife's birthday, carrying a pair of gray suede shoes he had bought in Paris. General Friedrich Dahlmann of the 7th Army had called division commanders to attend war games in Rennes. Even naval patrols were suspended due to the rough seas. That misplaced confidence would mark Germany's first major error. Unknown to Stube, the Allies had weather stations in Greenland and reconnaissance flights over the Atlantic that spotted a narrow break in the storm, a 36-hour window identified by Group Captain James Stagg and seized by Eisenhower. At 23:15 hours on June 5th, radar stations along the Normandy coast began detecting strange signals. Freya and Würzburg radar sets picked up enormous aerial formations moving in from the north. Operators dismissed it as another Allied deception raid, meant to keep them alert. But by 0030 hours on June 6th, the reports streaming in would shatter every assumption they had. Paratroopers, Fallschirmjäger, were dropping all across Normandy. But the reports coming in made no sense. Some units claimed they were landing to the east, others to the west. Some said the troops were British. Others insisted they were American. Dummy paratroopers fitted with firecrackers, part of Operations Titanic and Rupert, only deepened the confusion. Major Hans von Luck, commander of the 125th Panzergrenadier Regiment of the 21st Panzer Division, was among the first to grasp the seriousness of what was happening. Awakened by reports of parachutists descending near his sector, he immediately requested permission to counterattack. The reply from Divisional Command was terse. "Hold your position until the situation becomes clear," von Luck would later recall in his memoir, Panzer Commander. At that moment, I knew we were doomed. The paratroopers were clearly marking the flanks for a landing. Every minute of delay gave them time to strengthen their foothold, yet we sat frozen by our own bureaucracy. June 6th, 0530 hours. As the first pale light spread over the channel, German observers at forward posts began to witness something for which no training manual had prepared them. Werner Pluschart, whose presence on the coast remains debated by historians, including Severloh himself, has been credited in some accounts with being among the first to report the approaching fleet. What is certain is that German lookouts along the Normandy coastline saw the unimaginable. From one horizon to the other, the sea was blanketed with ships, not dozens or hundreds, but thousands. Every type of vessel imaginable. Towering battleships, swift destroyers, and countless landing craft filled the channel like a vast, shifting carpet of steel. The Allied invasion fleet totaled 6,939 ships, according to official records. 1,213 warships, 4,126 landing craft, 736 auxiliary vessels, and 864 merchant ships. It was the largest naval armada ever assembled in human history. For German defenders who had been fed endless propaganda about Allied weakness, the sight alone was shattering. Bernhard Furking, an artillery officer at WN 62 who would fall later that day, reportedly told his men, "We are watching the whole world arrive on our doorstep." At 0535, the naval bombardment began. Nothing the Germans had experienced. Neither the Eastern Front nor the worst RAF air raids could have prepared them for what came next. The battleship USS Texas alone fired 255 14-inch shells at Pointe du Hoc in just over half an hour, according to U.S. naval history and Heritage Command records. The British battleship HMS Warspite, first to open fire that morning around 0500, would unleash more than 315 heavy shells over the next 2 days, including 96 rounds on June 9th alone. The sheer scale of bombardment surpassed anything the Wehrmacht had ever endured. German veterans later told the Federal Archives that the concrete bunkers, believed to be indestructible, splintered and cracked under the relentless naval fire. Men were buried alive, dug out, and buried again as the explosions continued without pause. The psychological effect was every bit as ruinous as the physical damage. Those fortifications, once symbols of German invincibility, were disintegrating before their eyes. As the barrage roared on, the Luftwaffe's feeble response revealed how desperate their situation had become. Colonel Joseph Pips Priller, commander of Fighter Wing 26, received an order to strike the invasion fleet with his entire force. His reply, recorded in the unit's war diary, was bitterly ironic. "What entire force? I have 2 planes." The Luftwaffe, which had once boasted it would dominate the skies over any invasion, managed just 319 sorties on D-Day against 14,674 Allied missions, according to U.S. Navy intelligence reports. Preuler and his wingman, Unteroffizier Heinz Wodarczyk, carried out the only Luftwaffe attack on the beaches that morning, strafing Sword Beach once in their FW-190A8 fighters before fleeing from the overwhelming Allied air cover. That lone, fleeting attack by 2 German planes against an armada of thousands became the ultimate symbol of Germany's helplessness. The so-called Knights of the Air, once promised to darken the skies over any Allied invasion, had been reduced to a token gesture. At 0630 hours, the first assault waves slammed into the beaches. Despite the relentless bombardment, German defenders held their posts and opened fire. What followed was slaughter on a scale that stunned even seasoned soldiers. Heinrich Severloh, the machine gunner at WN-62, began firing at 0635. His position, one of the few left intact by naval shelling, commanded perfect fields of fire across the sands of Omaha Beach. In his 2005 memoir WN-62, Erinnerungen an Omaha Beach, Severloh claimed to have fired 13,500 rounds over 9 hours. While his personal estimate of casualties remains unverified, historians agree that his MG-42, spitting out up to 1,200 rounds per minute in controlled bursts, was a major contributor to the bloodbath later known as Bloody Omaha. The German defenders soon experienced what military analysts would later describe as material shock, the mental collapse that occurs when facing an unstoppable enemy. No matter how many Allied soldiers fell, more kept coming. Every landing craft destroyed was replaced by several more. Every silenced gun nest was immediately targeted by the seemingly endless barrage from Allied naval guns. By noon, many positions were reporting severe ammunition shortages. German logistics had planned for a limited engagement, not a full-scale invasion of this magnitude. Wehrmacht supply records show that units stocked with ammunition for a 3-day battle ran out within hours. Artillery batteries, the backbone of the defense, suffered the same fate. Ammunition reserves vanished under the sheer volume of fighting, and all attempts to bring up more failed. Every supply route was under constant attack from Allied fighter bombers. The difference in firepower was overwhelming. German spotters observed that American destroyers were expending hundreds of shells on single targets, while German artillerymen were rationed to just 4 shells per gun by that afternoon. Meanwhile, the Armored Reserve, the decisive strike force Rommel had insisted must crush any invasion on the beaches, remained immobilized during the critical morning hours. The 21st Panzer Division, the only armored formation near the coast, did not receive orders to advance until 1000 hours, 4 hours after the landings began. When it finally attacked at 1620, the division pushed between the British airborne landing zones toward the coast. According to its own records, the unit reached the shoreline between Lyon-sur-Mer and Luc-sur-Mer around 1900, the only German armored force to do so on D-Day. Yet by 210 hours, as Operation Mallard unfolded, 250 gliders bringing fresh reinforcements for the British 6th Airborne Division, the Panzers mistook the mass of incoming aircraft for a threat to their flank and withdrew. They had lost 54 tanks and armored vehicles that day, about a quarter of their strength. The counterattack also met unfamiliar Allied technology. Hobart's funnies, Specialized tanks equipped with mine-clearing flails, flamethrowers, and bridge-laying gear, machines that looked like they came from another age of warfare. Throughout the day, German troops faced a scale of threat they had never encountered before. Massive Allied airborne units operating deep behind their lines, the British 6th Airborne, along with America's 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions, sowed chaos that far exceeded their actual numbers. Colonel Friedrich von der Heyte, Germany's most experienced paratroop commander from the 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment, was present in Normandy during the invasion. His post-war assessment was brutally honest. The Allied airborne operation was everything ours had never been: large-scale, coordinated, and fully supplied. We dropped battalions, they dropped divisions. We relied on single planes, they had endless formations of gliders and transports. The psychological shock of seeing paratroopers everywhere crippled our ability to respond. Units refused to advance, fearing ambushes lurking in the darkness. Others fired blindly at shadows, sometimes even at their own men. Confusion multiplied Germany's problems beyond control. As D-Day unfolded, German command and control began to collapse entirely. Allied aircraft methodically destroyed communication lines, while the French resistance, activated by coded BBC broadcasts, cut telephone cables and demolished relay stations. Allied electronic warfare units jammed radio transmissions, plunging entire formations into silence. Lieutenant General Max Pemsel, Chief of Staff of the 7th Army, tried desperately to coordinate the defense from his headquarters in Le Mans. His war diary records growing frustration as contact with forward units faded one after another. By midday, whole divisions had vanished from the network. Field commanders were now making life-or-death decisions in isolation, unaware of the larger battle around them. When night fell on June 6th, the surviving German defenders assessed the wreckage of their situation. The supposedly impregnable Atlantic Wall had been breached in multiple sectors. The Luftwaffe had effectively vanished from Normandy's skies. The Kriegsmarine, despite its efforts, had managed to sink only one Allied destroyer, the USS Corrie, while losing 15 E-boats and numerous smaller vessels in return. Lieutenant General Wilhelm Richter, commander of the 716th Division, which had absorbed the main weight of the British assault, reported grimly to 7th Army headquarters. Division combat strength: 35% all coastal strongpoints lost. Artillery: 90% destroyed. Enemy advancing inland. The numbers told the story, a total tactical defeat, despite acts of individual bravery. In a single day, the German army had suffered losses comparable to a major battle, while the Allies continued to pour in fresh troops, as if the invasion were only beginning, not peaking. Throughout the night of June 6th and into June 7th, German units tried to regroup and launch counterattacks. These efforts only exposed the full extent of Allied superiority. Every movement was spotted by radar, illuminated by parachute flares, and obliterated by naval gunfire or artillery. Hans von Luck's Panzer Grenadiers, finally ordered to attack toward Sword Beach under cover of darkness, found themselves instantly bathed in light. In his memoir, von Luck recalled, "It was as bright as day. Every vehicle, every man was visible. The shells came from the sea with perfect accuracy. We lost half our strength without ever seeing the enemy." Meanwhile, the Allies kept landing reinforcements. Artificial mulberry harbors were already being pieced together, and supply ships lay anchored in precise rows. The invasion wasn't merely holding, it was evolving into a permanent occupation. German reinforcements trying to reach Normandy soon discovered that the roads themselves had become death traps. Every bridge, rail line, and highway was under relentless attack from Allied aircraft. Wehrmacht transport logs show that units expected to reach the front in a single day took up to 2 weeks. The 2nd SS Panzer Division, Das Reich, stationed near Toulouse, needed 17 days to reach Normandy, a trip that should have taken only 3. Along the way, it lost 30% of its vehicles to air attacks before even firing a shot. The psychological impact was catastrophic. If they could not even arrive at the battlefield intact, how could they hope to change its outcome? In stark contrast, Allied logistics functioned with astonishing efficiency. LSTS, landing ship, tank, were unloading entire armored regiments within hours. Within days of D-Day, the Allies were landing 15,000 tons of supplies every day, more than the entire German army in Normandy consumed in a week. By June 12th, German forces in Normandy were nearing total psychological collapse. They had lost 26,000 men killed, wounded, or missing, roughly 2 full divisions, with almost no replacements. Allied strength, meanwhile, was growing by the hour. On that same day, June 12th, the town of Carentan fell, linking the Utah and Omaha beachheads into a single, continuous front. The paratroopers of the 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment, elite soldiers who had never before retreated, were driven back in disarray. Their commander, Friedrich von der Heyte, reported bitterly to higher headquarters, "My regiment no longer exists as a combat unit. The survivors are psychologically broken." And on June 13th, SS Obersturmführer Michael Wittmann achieved one of the few German tactical victories of the Normandy campaign. According to British military archives, Michael Wittmann destroyed between 13 and 14 tanks, 2 anti-tank guns, and up to 15 personnel carriers during the Battle of Villers-Bocage, all within just 15 minutes. German propaganda quickly seized on this triumph as proof that German arms could still dominate the battlefield. Yet, even this celebrated victory underscored the hopelessness of Germany's position. Wittmann's Tiger tank, disabled in the fight, could only be replaced with great difficulty, while the British replaced their losses within hours. No amount of tactical brilliance could overcome the cold arithmetic of industrial warfare. Wittmann himself, credited with 138 confirmed tank kills across all fronts, was killed on August 8th when his Tiger was destroyed. Whether by British gunner Joe Eakins of the Northamptonshire Yeomanry or by Canadian forces remains debated. The Wehrmacht's greatest tank ace was ultimately felled by an enemy that could afford to lose 10 tanks for every Tiger destroyed. The fall of Cherbourg on June 26th delivered another crushing psychological blow. The heavily fortified port, garrisoned by 21,000 troops and strengthened over 4 years, was expected to hold out for months. Instead, it fell after just 5 days of serious fighting. Lieutenant General Karl Wilhelm von Schlieben, who had vowed to defend Cherbourg to the last bullet, surrendered on June 26th. In post-war interrogations, he explained that resistance had become meaningless in the face of the Allies' inexhaustible resources, a sentiment echoed again and again in German accounts of Normandy. Then came Operation Cobra, launched on July 25th, the decisive strike that shattered German defenses. According to U.S. Army Air Force records, the preliminary bombardment involved 1,503 heavy bombers, 380 medium bombers, and 550 fighter bombers, unleashing over 4,100 tons of explosives across an area barely 7,000 yards wide and 2,500 yards deep. Lieutenant General Fritz Bayerlein, commander of Panzer Lehr Division, radioed Army Group B with a message of despair. "My division is annihilated. The psychological state of the survivors is indescribable. They are no longer soldiers, they are broken men." The bombing was so intense that it even claimed the life of Lieutenant General Leslie McNair, the highest-ranking American officer killed in World War II. If American generals could not survive their own bombardments, what chance did German infantry have? The Falaise pocket, fought from August 12th to 21st, became the graveyard of German forces in Normandy. Allied intelligence reports, later verified by German post-war records, estimate that roughly 10,000 Germans were killed and 50,000 captured. More than 300 tanks and armored vehicles were lost, along with some 2,500 other vehicles. Those who tried to escape described scenes of utter devastation, roads clogged with corpses of men and horses, and wrecked columns burning for miles. Allied fighter bombers swept over every 20 minutes, while artillery fire never ceased. The destruction was so complete that many German soldiers simply surrendered, preferring captivity to certain death. The final numbers from the Normandy campaign tell the story of total defeat. From June 6th to August 31st, German forces suffered around 320,000 casualties, including 30,000 killed, 80,000 wounded, and 210,000 missing or captured. They lost 2,300 tanks, virtually all their armored strength in France, and 2,127 aircraft. The Allies, by comparison, sustained 209,672 casualties. But their vast resources meant they replaced losses faster than they occurred. Around 4,000 tanks were destroyed, replaced within weeks, and 4,101 aircraft were lost from a fleet exceeding 13,000. The contrast revealed the inescapable truth. Germany was fighting a war of attrition it could never hope to win, facing an enemy with endless men, machines, and materials. Among the professional German officers, few illusions remained. General der Panzertruppen Heinrich Severloh, commander of armored forces in Normandy, would later offer one of the most clear-eyed assessments of the catastrophe. After Rommel was gravely wounded by Allied aircraft, command in Normandy passed to General Heinrich Severloh. On August 1st, he reported grimly to the German High Command, OKW. The enemy's material superiority is at least 20-1 in artillery, 10-1 in tanks, and absolute in the air. He replaces all losses within days. We cannot replace anything. General Hans Speidel, Rommel's chief of staff, would later summarize the lesson in his 1949 memoir. Normandy proved that courage alone could not overcome industrial supremacy. We faced an enemy who had mechanized not just warfare, but victory itself. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel himself left perhaps the most haunting testimony in his final report to Hitler on July 15th. Just 2 days before his car was strafed by Allied aircraft, he wrote, "The enemy's overwhelming superiority in men and materiel is beginning to tell I must beg you to draw the necessary conclusions without delay." In the coded language of the military, this was an admission of total defeat. Germany's most respected field commander was telling Hitler the unthinkable. The war was lost. The Normandy campaign had revealed a fundamental truth. World War II had become a production. War German soldiers came face to face with an industrial capacity so vast that it defied comprehension. Ford's Willow Run plant in Michigan, for instance, produced one B-24 bomber every 63 minutes at peak output. In 1944 alone, American factories built 96,000 aircraft. Allied forces fired more ammunition in a single day of battle than Germany could manufacture in an entire month. A single American division consumed more supplies daily than an entire German corps. As veteran Hans von Luck would later reflect, we learned that modern war was not about tactics or courage, but about production. The Americans had turned war into an industrial process. They manufactured victory on assembly lines. For the survivors of Normandy, the experience was transformative and shattering everything they had been taught about warfare, destiny, and racial superiority collapsed before their eyes. Machine gunner Heinrich Severloh, who manned position WN-62 on Omaha Beach, spent the rest of his life haunted by D-Day meeting American veterans. Decades later, he wrote, "We all realized we had been young men thrown into an industrial slaughterhouse. My 13,500 rounds meant nothing against their unlimited replacements." Paratrooper Commander Friedrich von der Heyte, who became a professor of international law after the war, concluded, "Normandy taught us that the age of warrior heroes was over. War had become a matter of industrial capacity, and we had challenged the world's greatest industrial power with horses and outdated dreams." From the German perspective, D-Day was more than a military defeat. It was an ideological and psychological collapse. Soldiers who had conquered most of Europe suddenly discovered that everything they believed about their enemies and their own superiority was catastrophically wrong. They had expected to fight weak, divided democracies. Instead, they encountered an alliance that had transformed warfare into an industrial process of staggering precision and efficiency. They watched democracy's arsenal in action, an endless flow of ships, planes, tanks, and supplies pouring from factories whose productivity was beyond German imagination. They learned that modern war was no longer won by the bravest soldiers, but by the most productive societies, not on the battlefield, but in the factory. The Western Allies had turned conflict into a mathematical equation, production output versus attrition rates, where numbers, not valor, decided the outcome. Heinrich Severloh began June 6th, believing the invasion would be repelled within hours. By nightfall, he sat surrounded by thousands of empty shell casings, watching wave after wave of Allied troops landing on a beach his position was meant to defend. His experience became a symbol of Germany's larger tragedy in Normandy. Tactical success drowned in strategic impossibility. The beaches of Normandy were not just a battlefield, they were a revelation. The German army discovered the future of warfare, and it belonged to the nations that could produce the most and sustain it the longest. They had brought courage, discipline, and determination. The Allies brought unlimited industrial power. In trying to hold back the invasion, the German defenders might as well have been trying to hold back the tide. They fought until their barrels melted, until their ammunition was gone, only to watch the Allies bring more of everything. The mathematics of modern war had rendered their bravery irrelevant. The soldiers of the Third Reich began June 6th as confident warriors of a global empire, and ended it as stunned witnesses to the arsenal of democracy in full, unstoppable motion. Their defeat was not just military, it was total. The Nazi vision of racial and military superiority had collided head-on with the industrial might of the free world, and it shattered completely. The invasion they had sworn to drive into the sea instead swept them away, along with the last illusions of German victory.